Back again with Luxonis DepthAI OPENCV developer kit for the OAD-D and OAD-D depth cameras. What you're seeing here is a visualization of utilizing a spatial computer such as the HoloLens 1, HoloLens 2, or the Magic Leap with an application such as VNcaster. And then what we're going to do is mirror cast right to your TV. And I want to show all kinds of different developers out there these kinds of situations and how you can implement them, because if you want to run this in embedded projects headless out in the field and you have a screen that's very close nearby, you can go up and log into your system remotely and then broadcast it out there so interested engineers and enthusiasts or whoever's utilizing this application out in the field can see this up on a big screen. I always find this extremely helpful when trying to showcase or train individuals all over the world, especially engineers, so they can see this system without plugging in directly to the Raspberry Pi. Let's dig into this, the rest of Depth Camera Essentials Volume 33.4, which I'm going to go into just trying to attempt and see if I can measure any kind of latency on the OAD-D and OAD-D systems while I'm plugging in Intel RealSense cameras. Let's go ahead and get started. Hello and welcome back. So the purpose of this video is to attempt and open several different applications to assess whether or not this negatively impacts the neural nets running on the OAD-D or OAD-D for the Luxonis DepthAI platform. I don't believe it will. It's static at 30 frames per second, both in the neural net and the 4K 30 frames per second RGB with rolling shutter. And you can see that right now. I'm just using a face tracking neural net and an object detector, which I showcased in volume 33.3, okay? So let's jump into just the first application here for the Intel RealSense on the SR305 and the T265 motion tracking system, okay? Let's go. All right, here we go. Let's start with the Intel RealSense T265 first. This is the motion tracking example that's provided in the Intel RealSense SDK. You can all run it. It's open source. So let's go ahead and run that now, and let's see how this system interacts right here. So what we're going to see first is the camera as we start moving it. So here's the camera here, and we're going to move it. And is anything negatively impacting on the neural nets? Let's take a look. Let's look right here. We got 30 frames per second neural net, 30 frames per second on the RGB. Still no negative activity on the system because that is the Intel Movidius Myriad X. That's the advantage of this system. It's running 4 trillion calculations per second, and then the Intel RealSense is able to optimize the Raspberry Pi computational system without being negatively impacted. It's just fascinating. Let's run into the next example now. Let's test the trajectory algorithm in the Intel RealSense T265. I've showcased this previously in robotic platforms and autonomous navigation. I've used it at the University of Washington in the robotic race. It's fascinating. It's a wonderful implementation. I highly recommend it to anybody who's in the robotics platform industry or anybody who is developing autonomous navigation for AI machine learning systems. Let's test it now. So this should come up, and right away, now we're going to track. Now, I want to see if there's any latency on this at all. And there's no latency on the tracking, which is wonderful to see. So now let's zoom in. Do we see any latency on the neural nets? No, we do not. Again, it's at 30 frames per second, both in the neural net and the RGB. That's wonderful. Let's keep going. Let's finalize this last R&D testing for the DepthAI OPENCV developer kit for Luxonis OAD-D and OAD-D depth cameras. What you're looking at here is the Intel RealSense SR305 coded light sensors. This is one of my favorite depth cameras on the entire market, mainly because it's $80 and it's able to accomplish some wonderful things versus all the competitors out there. I highly recommend it, especially if you have robotic autonomous platforms, just like the Sunfounder kit, okay? So let's come back here to see if we have any latency on this last test. So let me see if I can zoom over just a little bit so you guys can see the coded light sensor. There you go. Doesn't appear to be too much latency on this side. I also have a little RGB camera on the other side as well. But that's wonderful. I essentially have 3 different cameras plus the SR305 all running at the same time on this little Raspberry Pi. Again, it's coming right here. But let's look at the test. I don't see any latency at all. I have not seen any of these frames per second dip below 30, and that's fantastic. So just to finalize, the reason I'm sharing this with all you guys, these are things I usually do internally for research and development, but I wanted to kind of empower you with these platforms because I like to take low-cost robotic platforms and make them intelligent via perception engines using AI inference models and machine learning systems using TensorFlow. Now we can take these systems with a $50 camera and make them compete with $1,000 robotic platforms. And that's nothing we've been able to see in the last 20 years. And now in 2021, that reality is finally come to fruition, and I'm so excited. Thank you so much for tuning in to Depth Camera Central Volume 33.4. I really appreciate it. Have a wonderful day.